The socialite humiliated the humble guy, but when she found out who his parents were, she shook with fear. From the moment he stepped into the luxurious ballroom, Ethan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. His worn-out shoes barely made a sound on the marble floor, but it didn't matter. To them, he was invisible. Until she saw him. The crowd parted, and there she was, the queen of high society, with a stare so cold it could freeze time itself. One mistake, one slip, and her words cut through the air like a knife. "You don't belong here." But what neither of them knew was that this humiliate. As the night unfolds, Ethan's world begins to collide with hers in ways no one could have ever imagined. This isn't just a story about class or status. It's about something much deeper, something hidden in the shadows of the past. What starts as a night of shame quickly spirals into a mystery that will change both their lives forever. And the truth, when it's finally revealed, will leave everyone breathless. How could one encounter, one moment of cruelty, lead to a revelation so powerful it shakes the foundations of everything they thought they knew? You won't believe what happens next. The opulent ballroom of the Astoria Hotel in New York City buzzed with the chatter of Manhattan's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. It was the annual charity gala for the city's most prestigious art museum, an event where the wealthy came to see and be seen. Amidst the glittering crowd, a young man named Ethan Miller stood out like a sore thumb. His ill-fitting rental tux hung awkwardly on his lanky frame, and his calloused hands betrayed his working-class background. Ethan's dark eyes darted nervously around the room as he balanced a tray of champagne flutes, praying he wouldn't drop anything. At just 22, Ethan was used to feeling out of place. Growing up in a tiny apartment in the Bronx with his single mother, Margaret, he had always been acutely aware of the vast gulf between his world and that of the upper crust. But tonight, that divide felt more insurmountable than ever. As Ethan weaved through the crowd, he caught snippets of conversation about summer homes in the Hamptons and private jets to Paris. His stomach clenched as he thought of his mother, lying in a hospital bed across town. The extra cash from this catering gig would help cover her mounting medical bills, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to what they really needed. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room as Claire Worthington made her grand entrance. Even in a sea of beautiful people, the 35-year-old socialite commanded attention. Her statuesque figure was poured into a crimson Valentino gown, and diamonds dripped from her ears and throat. Claire's icy blue eyes surveyed the crowd imperiously as she glided across the marble floor. Ethan couldn't help but stare. He had seen Claire's face plastered across gossip magazines and social media, but nothing prepared him for her presence in the flesh. She radiated power and privilege, everything he had never known. As if sensing his gaze, Claire's eyes locked onto Ethan. For a brief moment, their worlds collided. Ethan felt a jolt of electricity course through him, and he quickly looked away, his cheeks burning. "You there, waiter?" Claire's voice cut through the air like a whip. "More champagne now." Ethan's heart raced as he hurried over, carefully balancing his tray. As he approached, he could smell Claire's intoxicating perfume, something expensive and exotic that made his head spin. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan stammered, offering the tray. Claire plucked a glass from it, her manicured nails grazing Ethan's trembling hand. She took a delicate sip, her crimson lips leaving a perfect imprint on the crystal. "Not bad," she mused, eyeing Ethan with amusement. "Tell me, boy, what's your name?" "Ethan, ma'am, Ethan Miller." Claire's perfectly arched eyebrow raised a fraction. "Miller? How quaint. Well, Ethan Miller, do try not to spill anything on my gown. It's worth more than you'll make in a year." Laughter rippled through Claire's circle of sycophants. Ethan's face burned with humiliation, but he forced a tight smile. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be careful." As he turned to leave, disaster struck. A portly man in an ill-fitting tuxedo stumbled backwards, colliding with Ethan. Time seemed to slow as the tray of champagne flutes teetered, then toppled. Glass shattered on the marble floor, and golden liquid splashed across Claire's exquisite gown. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Claire's shrill voice cut through the air like a knife. "You clumsy oaf!" she shrieked, her face contorted with rage. "Look what you've done!" Ethan dropped to his knees, frantically trying to mop up the spilled champagne with a cloth napkin. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he babbled. "It was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning." Claire let out a harsh laugh. "Pay for it? With what money? I doubt you could afford the hem of this dress, let alone dry cleaning." She turned to address the crowd, which had gathered to watch the spectacle. "Can you believe the help they're hiring these days? Absolutely disgraceful." Tears of shame and anger pricked at Ethan's eyes as he continued to clean up the mess with shaking hands. He wanted nothing more than to disappear, to wake up and find this had all been a terrible dream. "Oh, don't bother," Claire sneered, snatching the napkin from Ethan's hands. "You'll only make it worse. Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of. You clearly don't belong here." The crowd tittered nervously, caught between schadenfreude and discomfort at Claire's cruelty. Ethan slowly got to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. "I said go!" Claire snapped, giving Ethan a hard shove that sent him stumbling backwards. As he regained his balance, Ethan's eyes met Claire's. In that moment, something passed between them, a spark of recognition perhaps, or a premonition of things to come. For just a second, Claire's mask of disdain slipped, revealing a flicker of, what? Fear? Uncertainty? But then it was gone, replaced once more by cold contempt. Ethan turned and fled, pushing his way through the crowd of onlookers. Whispers and giggles followed him as he burst out of the ballroom and into the hotel's service corridor. Once he was alone, Ethan leaned against the wall, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. Hot tears spilled down his cheeks as the full weight of his humiliation crashed over him. He thought of his mother, of all the sacrifices she had made to give him a better life. And for what? So he could be treated like dirt by people like Claire Worthington? As Ethan struggled to compose himself, he had no way of knowing that his life was about to change forever. The threads of fate were already in motion, weaving together a tapestry of secrets, lies, and long-buried truths. In the glittering ballroom, Claire sipped her champagne and laughed with her admirers, blissfully unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. And in a hospital room across town, Margaret Miller clutched a worn photograph to her chest, praying that the time had finally come to reveal the truth she had kept hidden for so long. The stage was set, the players were in place, and nothing would ever be the same again. The flickering fluorescent lights of the subway car cast harsh shadows across Ethan's face as he made his way home, his mind still reeling from the events of the evening. The memory of Claire Worthington's cruel laughter echoed in his ears, drowning out the rattle of the train on the tracks. He closed his eyes, trying to shut out the world, but the image of her contemptuous sneer was burned into his retinas. As the train lurched to a stop at his station in the Bronx, Ethan dragged himself to his feet. The late-night platform was nearly deserted, save for a homeless man huddled in a corner and a pair of teenagers sharing earbuds. None of them paid any attention to Ethan as he trudged up the stairs and out into the muggy New York night. The walk to his apartment building felt longer than usual, each step a Herculean effort. By the time Ethan reached the dingy fifth-floor walk-up he shared with his mother, he was emotionally and physically exhausted. He fumbled with his keys, the metal scraping against the lock before finally turning. "Mom?" he called out softly as he entered the cramped living room. "You still up?" Margaret Miller's voice drifted from her bedroom, weak but warm. "In here, sweetheart, how was work?" Ethan's throat tightened as he made his way to his mother's room. He found her propped up in bed, a tattered paperback novel resting in her lap. Even in the dim light of her bedside lamp, he could see how pale and drawn she looked. The chemotherapy was taking its toll. "It was fine," Ethan lied, forcing a smile as he perched on the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling? Did you eat anything?" Margaret reached out to take her son's hand, her skin cool and papery against his. "I managed some soup earlier. Don't change the subject, Ethan. Something's wrong. I can see it in your eyes." For a moment, Ethan considered brushing off her concern, but the weight of the evening's humiliation was too much to bear alone. The words spilled out of him in a torrent. The spilled champagne, Claire's cruel taunts, the laughter of the crowd. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down his face. "Oh, my sweet boy," Margaret murmured, pulling Ethan into a fierce hug despite her frailty. I'm so sorry you had to endure that. People like that. They don't know what real strength is, what real love is. Ethan clung to his mother, inhaling the familiar scent of her lavender soap. I just don't understand, Mom, he whispered. Why are people so cruel? Why does it feel like the whole world is against us sometimes? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Ethan's hair. When she finally spoke, there was a strange tension in her voice. Ethan, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Ethan pulled back, searching his mother's face. What is it, Mom? Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes suddenly brimming with unshed tears. It's about your father. The man I told you died before you were born. That wasn't entirely true. A cold knot of dread formed in Ethan's stomach. What do you mean? Your father. He was a good man in many ways, but he was also married when I met him. We fell in love, and for a while I thought we could make it work. But when I got pregnant with you... Margaret's voice trailed off, lost in painful memories. Ethan's mind reeled. Are you saying my father is still alive? Margaret nodded slowly. He is. Or at least he was until recently. I saw his obituary in the paper last week. That's why I've been thinking so much about the past, about the choices we made. Who was he? Ethan demanded, a lifetime of questions suddenly bubbling to the surface. Why didn't he want to know me? Why did you keep this a secret for so long? Margaret's eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Your father was a powerful man, Ethan. Richard Worthington. Worthington? Ethan interrupted, his voice rising in disbelief. As in, Claire Worthington? Margaret nodded grimly. Claire was his wife, is his widow now, I suppose. The room seemed to spin around Ethan as the implications of this revelation crashed over him. Claire Worthington, the woman who had humiliated him just hours ago, was his stepmother. The father he had never known was a wealthy businessman, now dead and beyond his reach. I don't understand, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. Why are you telling me this now? Margaret squeezed her son's hand. Because things are about to change, Ethan. Richard's death, it means the truth might come out. And I wanted you to hear it from me first. As if on cue, there was a sharp knock at the apartment door. Ethan and Margaret exchanged a startled glance. It was well past midnight. Who could be calling at this hour? With shaking legs, Ethan made his way to the door. He peered through the peephole, then stumbled back in shock. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, looking utterly out of place in her designer suit, was Claire Worthington, the woman who had humiliated him. The widow of the father he never knew, his stepmother. Ethan's hand hovered over the doorknob as his world tilted on its axis. Whatever lay on the other side of that door, he knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same again. With a deep breath, he turned the knob and came face to face with his past, his present, and his uncertain future. The tension in the small apartment was palpable as Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Claire Worthington. Her icy blue eyes, which had looked down on him with such disdain just hours ago, now held a mix of uncertainty and barely concealed panic. May I come in? Claire asked, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. Without waiting for an answer, she brushed past Ethan into the cramped living room, her Louboutin heels clicking on the worn linoleum floor. Ethan closed the door, his mind racing. How had she found him? Why was she here? He turned to face Claire, who was eyeing the shabby furniture and peeling wallpaper with poorly disguised distaste. Ms. Worthington, Ethan began, struggling to keep his voice steady. I don't understand. Where is she? Claire interrupted, her gaze darting around the apartment. Where's Margaret? Before Ethan could respond, his mother's voice called out from the bedroom. I'm in here, Claire. It's been a long time. Claire's shoulders stiffened at the sound of Margaret's voice. She strode towards the bedroom, leaving Ethan no choice but to follow. As they entered the small room, Ethan saw his mother sitting up in bed, her face a mask of calm resolve. Hello, Claire, Margaret said softly. I wish we were meeting again under better circumstances. Claire stood at the foot of the bed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. How dare you, she hissed. How dare you keep this from me, from us, all these years? Ethan looked between the two women, confusion and anger warring within him. "Will someone please tell me what's going on?" he demanded. Claire whirled to face him, her eyes blazing. "What's going on is that your mother has been lying to everyone for over 2 decades. My husband, your father, is dead, and now the truth is going to destroy everything." "Claire," Margaret said, her voice gentle but firm. "Ethan deserves to know the whole story. Please sit down, both of you." Reluctantly, Claire perched on the edge of a threadbare armchair while Ethan sat beside his mother on the bed. Margaret took a deep breath, her fingers twisting the frayed edge of her blanket. "I met Richard Worthington at a charity event in 1999, she began. "I was working as a caterer and he was magnetic, charming. We started talking, and before I knew it, we were falling in love." Claire scoffed, but Margaret continued undeterred. "I knew he was married, but he told me things weren't good between you, that he was going to leave you. I was young and naive enough to believe him." "And then you got pregnant," Claire spat. "How convenient." Margaret's eyes flashed with a spark of her old fire. "It wasn't planned, Claire. When I told Richard, he panicked. He said he couldn't leave you, that it would ruin his reputation, his business. He offered me money to take care of it." Ethan felt sick to his stomach. "But you didn't," he whispered. Margaret smiled sadly, reaching out to cup her son's cheek. "No, I didn't. I couldn't. I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. So I told Richard I was keeping the baby, with or without his support." "And he chose without," Claire said, her voice cold. Margaret nodded. "He made me promise never to tell anyone, especially you, Claire. He said he'd make sure we were taken care of financially, but that he couldn't be part of Ethan's life. I was heartbroken, but I agreed. I thought it was for the best." Ethan's mind was reeling. "But why tell us now? Why did you come here tonight?" he asked Claire. Claire's composure cracked, and for the first time, Ethan saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Because your father left you half of everything in his will," she said. "The lawyers found out about you, Ethan. By this time tomorrow, the whole world will know that Richard Worthington had a secret son." The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. Ethan felt as though he were drowning, struggling to make sense of a world that had suddenly turned upside down. "I don't want his money," Ethan said finally, his voice hoarse. "I don't want any part of this." Claire laughed bitterly. "It's not that simple. Once this gets out, the vultures will be circling. The press, the board of directors, every gold digger and con artist in the tri-state area. My life, the life Richard and I built, it will all come crashing down." "I'm sorry, Claire," Margaret said softly. "I never wanted this to happen. I thought I was protecting Ethan, protecting all of us. But secrets have a way of coming out eventually." As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood run cold. It was from his best friend, Jake. "Dude, why is your face all over Twitter? Something about you being a secret Worthington heir?" Ethan looked up, meeting Claire's panicked gaze. "It's already happening," he said. "The story's breaking." Claire leapt to her feet, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "I won't let it. There has to be a way to stop this." As Claire ranted, Ethan's gaze was drawn to his mother. Margaret's face had gone pale, and she was clutching her chest, her breathing labored. "Mom," Ethan said, alarm rising in his voice. "Mom, what's wrong?" Margaret tried to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes rolled back in her head as she slumped against the pillows. "Mom," Ethan cried, grabbing her shoulders. "Claire, call 911 now!" As Claire fumbled for her phone, Ethan held his mother's limp hand, tears streaming down his face. In the distance, sirens began to wail, their urgent cry a fitting soundtrack to a world spinning out of control. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. But as Ethan watched the paramedics rush his mother out of the apartment, he realized that some things were far more important than money or reputation. With a newfound determination, he followed the stretcher out into the night, leaving a shell-shocked Claire behind. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He would face them head-on for his mother's sake. The Worthington legacy could wait. Right now, all that mattered was family. The real kind, built on love and sacrifice. not wealth and secrets. The harsh fluorescent lights of New York Presbyterian Hospital cast an otherworldly glow over the waiting room. Ethan sat hunched in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his head in his hands. The events of the past few hours felt like a surreal nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. Across from him, Claire paced back and forth, her designer heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the linoleum floor. She had insisted on accompanying Ethan to the hospital, though whether out of genuine concern or a desire to control the situation, he couldn't be sure. "Mr. Miller?" Ethan's head snapped up at the sound of the doctor's voice. He stood quickly, his heart pounding. "Yes? How's my mom?" The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, gave him a reassuring smile. "Your mother is stable now. We've got her on medication to regulate her heart rhythm. The stress and her weakened condition from the chemotherapy likely triggered the episode." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "Can I see her?" "Of course, she's asking for you." The doctor paused, glancing at Claire. "Both of you, actually." Claire's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded stiffly. As they followed the doctor down the sterile hallway, Ethan's mind raced. What more could his mother possibly have to say? Margaret looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, hooked up to various monitors and IVs. But her eyes were clear and determined as Ethan and Claire entered the room. "My boys," she said softly, reaching out a hand to each of them. Ethan took it immediately while Claire hesitated before allowing Margaret to grasp her fingers. "Mom, you scared me half to death," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctor said you're going to be okay, though." Margaret nodded. "For now. But we both know the cancer isn't going away, sweetheart. That's why I need to tell you both everything before it's too late." Claire stiffened. "What do you mean, everything? What more could there possibly be?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Richard came to see me about a month before he died." The room fell silent. Ethan felt as though the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Claire's face had gone deathly pale. "He knew he was dying," Margaret continued. "He wanted to make things right as much as he could. He told me he was changing his will, leaving half of everything to Ethan." "We know that already," Claire snapped. "That's why we're in this mess." Margaret shook her head. "There's more. Richard, he wasn't just Ethan's father, he was yours too, Claire." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan felt the room spin around him as he struggled to process what he had just heard. Claire stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a nearby chair for support. "That's impossible," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "My father was Jonathan Prescott. He died when I was a child. Mother remarried Richard when I was 10. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Claire. Your mother and Richard, they had an affair years before he and I ever met. When she got pregnant, they agreed to keep it a secret. Jonathan never knew." Claire's legs gave out and she sank into the chair. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "No, you're lying. This can't be true." "It is," Margaret said gently. "Richard showed me the DNA test results. He wanted you both to know the truth, to have a chance to be a real family. That's why he changed his will." Ethan's mind was reeling. Claire wasn't just his stepmother. She was his half-sister, the woman who had humiliated him, who he had resented for her privilege and cruelty, shared his blood. "Why didn't he tell us himself?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret sighed. He was afraid. Afraid of destroying the image Claire had of her parents, afraid of ruining his reputation. In the end, he couldn't face it. "He made me promise to tell you both after he was gone." Claire stood abruptly, her face a mask of fury and pain. "I don't believe you," she hissed. "This is just another lie, another manipulation. You're trying to steal what's rightfully mine." "Claire, please," Margaret pleaded. "I know this is a shock, but—" "No," Claire shouted. "I won't listen to this. I won't let you destroy everything I've ever known, everything I am." With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving Ethan and Margaret in stunned silence. Ethan sank into the chair Claire had vacated, his mind struggling to process the bombshell that had just been dropped. "Mom," he said quietly, "is it really true? All of it?" Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm so sorry I kept it from you for so long. I thought I was protecting you both, but I see now that secrets only cause more pain in the end." Ethan took his mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "What do we do now?" Margaret managed a weak smile. "We face the truth together, and we try to heal the wounds that have been festering for far too long." As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, but he had a sinking feeling he knew who it was. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. "Is this Ethan Miller?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Sarah Donovan from the New York Times. We'd like to schedule an interview about your newfound status as the secret Worthington heir. Care to comment on the rumors circulating about your parentage?" Ethan's gaze met his mother's. In that moment, he knew that the life he had known was over. The truth was out, and there was no going back. All he could do now was face whatever came next with the same strength and dignity his mother had shown all these years. "I'm sorry," he said into the phone, "but I have no comment at this time." As he ended the call, Ethan took a deep breath. The storm was only beginning, but for the first time in his life, he felt a strange sense of clarity. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on, with the knowledge that he was no longer alone in the world. The truth had shattered the foundations of everything he thought he knew, but from the rubble, perhaps something stronger could be built. A real family, bound not by secrets and lies, but by shared blood and the chance for redemption. As Ethan sat by his mother's bedside holding her hand, he steeled himself for the battles to come. The Worthington legacy was his now, whether he wanted it or not, and he was determined to use it to make things right. For himself, for his mother, and even for Claire, the sister he never knew he had. The world outside was clamoring for answers, but for now, in this quiet hospital room, Ethan found a moment of peace. Whatever came next, he would face it with the truth as his shield and the love of his mother as his strength. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Ethan's life. He had spent the night at the hospital, dozing fitfully in the uncomfortable chair by his mother's bedside. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, each one a reminder of the storm raging beyond these sterile walls. With a heavy sigh, he unlocked his phone and was immediately bombarded with headlines. Secret Worthington heir discovered. Scandal rocks New York elite. Claire Worthington's brother. The shocking truth behind the business empire. From rags to riches, the Ethan Miller story. Ethan's stomach churned as he scrolled through the articles, each one more sensationalized than the last. His entire life had been laid bare for the world to see, dissected and speculated upon by strangers who knew nothing of the real story. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A nurse poked her head in, her expression apologetic. "Mr. Miller, there are some reporters in the lobby asking for you. Hospital security is keeping them out, but I thought you should know." Ethan nodded, grateful for the warning. "Thank you, I appreciate it." As the nurse left, Margaret stirred in her bed. "Ethan, what time is it?" "Early, Mom," he said, moving to her side. "How are you feeling?" Margaret managed a weak smile. "Like I've been hit by a truck, but I'm still here." Her eyes narrowed as she took in Ethan's haggard appearance. "You look terrible, sweetheart. Have you slept at all?" Ethan shook his head. "Not really, it's been a long night." Just then, his phone rang. The screen displayed a number he didn't recognize. With a sense of dread, he answered. "Hello? Mr. Miller? This is Charles Westbrook from Worthington Industries. The board of directors has called an emergency meeting to discuss recent developments. Your presence is requested at 2 p.m. today at our Manhattan headquarters." Ethan's mind reeled. I don't know if I can make it. My mother is in the hospital and—" "Mr. Miller," Westbrook interrupted, his tone clipped. "I understand this is a difficult time, but the future of a multi-billion-dollar company is at stake. Your attendance is not optional." Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone in disbelief. "What is it?" Margaret asked, concern etching her features. Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "The Worthington board wants to meet with me today. I don't know what to do, Mom. I'm not prepared for any of this." Margaret reached out, taking her son's hand. "Ethan, listen to me. You are stronger than you know. You've faced adversity your whole life and come out standing. This is just another challenge, albeit a bigger one. But what about you? I can't leave you here alone. I'll be fine, Margaret assured him. The doctors are taking good care of me. You need to face this head on. It's your legacy now, whether you want it or not. Ethan nodded, squeezing his mother's hand. Okay, I'll go. But first, I need to find some clothes that don't smell like hospital coffee. As if on cue, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was a courier holding a garment bag. Delivery for Ethan Miller? Confused, Ethan accepted the bag. Inside, he found a perfectly tailored suit, crisp white shirt, and Italian leather shoes. A note was pinned to the lapel. You'll need this. Good luck, Claire, Ethan murmured, a mix of emotions swirling within him. Despite everything, his newfound sister had thought of this detail. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan changed into the suit. As he straightened his tie, he caught his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him looked different, older somehow, and burdened with the weight of his new reality. You look like him, Margaret said softly, like Richard. Ethan turned to his mother, his heart heavy. I'm not him, Mom. I won't make the same mistakes. Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening. I know you won't, sweetheart. Now go. Show them who Ethan Miller really is. With a final kiss on his mother's forehead, Ethan steeled himself and walked out of the hospital room. As he made his way through the lobby, ignoring the clamoring reporters, he felt as though he were stepping onto a battlefield. The taxi ride to Worthington Industries headquarters was a blur of skyscrapers and honking horns. Ethan's mind raced, trying to prepare for what lay ahead. He had no experience in business, no knowledge of the corporate world. How could he possibly face a room full of seasoned executives? As the taxi pulled up to the towering glass edifice of Worthington Industries, Ethan took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define his future. He stepped out of the cab, straightening his shoulders. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, held back by security guards. Ethan ignored them all, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Just as he reached the revolving doors, a familiar voice called out, "Ethan, wait!" He turned to see Claire hurrying towards him, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a moment, they stood face to face, the chaos of the world fading away. I don't know what to believe anymore, Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I do know one thing. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not. Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Together, he agreed. Side by side, the newfound siblings walked into the building, ready to face whatever came next. As the elevator climbed towards the top floor, Ethan realized that this was more than just a meeting. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the entire Worthington legacy. The doors opened, revealing a room full of stern-faced executives. At the head of the table sat Charles Westbrook, his expression unreadable. Mr. Miller, Ms. Worthington, he said, gesturing to two empty seats. Shall we begin? Ethan took a deep breath and stepped into the room, ready to fight for his place in this new world. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The boardroom of Worthington Industries was a study in opulence and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline, while the gleaming mahogany table reflected the tense faces of those gathered around it. Ethan felt every eye upon him as he took his seat, acutely aware of how out of place he must seem in this world of corporate titans. Charles Westbrook, the silver-haired chairman of the board, cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. The revelation of Mr. Miller's existence and his claim to half of Richard Worthington's estate has sent shockwaves through our company and the business world at large. Murmurs rippled around the table. Ethan glanced at Claire, who sat rigid in her chair, her face an impassive mask. Mr. Miller, Westbrook continued, fixing Ethan with a penetrating stare. Perhaps you'd like to share your intentions with the board. What exactly do you hope to gain from this situation? Ethan took a deep breath, willing his voice not to shake. Mr. Westbrook, members of the board, I want to make one thing clear. I never asked for any of this. Until yesterday, I had no idea who my father was or that I had any claim to the Worthington fortune. Convenient, a sharp-faced woman interjected. And we're supposed to believe that you have no interest in the billions of dollars you've suddenly inherited? Ethan felt a flare of anger. With all due respect, you don't know anything about me or my life. My mother raised me to value hard work and integrity, not money and power. I'm here because I was summoned, not because I'm trying to stake a claim. Noble sentiments, Westbrook said, his tone skeptical. But the fact remains that you now own half of this company. What do you intend to do with that power? Before Ethan could respond, Claire spoke up. If I may, I think we're overlooking a crucial point here. All eyes turned to her. Ethan isn't just Richard's son. He's my brother. A shocked silence fell over the room. Clearly, this piece of information hadn't been widely shared yet. Claire continued, her voice gaining strength. We've all been blindsided by these revelations, but the fact is, Ethan is as much a Worthington as I am. And I, for one, think it's time we started treating him as such. Ethan stared at Claire in disbelief. After their tumultuous first encounters, he never expected her to come to his defense. Westbrook leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Ms. Worthington, while your familial loyalty is admirable, we must consider the stability of the company. Mr. Miller has no experience in business, let alone in running a corporation of this magnitude. Then we'll teach him, Claire said firmly. Richard clearly believed Ethan was capable of this, or he wouldn't have left him half the company. I say we honor my father's wishes and give Ethan a chance to prove himself. The boardroom erupted into heated discussions. Ethan's head spun as he tried to follow the rapid-fire arguments flying across the table. Phrases like stock prices, shareholder confidence, and media fallout swirled around him. Finally, Westbrook raised a hand for silence. It's clear that this situation requires careful consideration. I propose we take a short recess to collect our thoughts. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As the board members filed out of the room, Claire turned to Ethan. Come with me, she said, her tone brooking no argument. She led him to a private office down the hall, closing the door behind them. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Then, to Ethan's surprise, Claire's composure cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sank into a leather armchair. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. My whole life feels like a lie. The father I thought I knew, the mother I idolized. It's all built on secrets and deception. Ethan hesitated, then sat in the chair beside her. I'm sorry, Claire, I never wanted to upend your life like this. Claire laughed bitterly. It's not your fault. If anything, I should be apologizing to you. The way I treated you at the gala, God, I was awful. You didn't know, Ethan said softly. That's no excuse, Claire replied, shaking her head. I've spent my whole life looking down on people, thinking I was better because of my name, my money. And now? She trailed off, lost in thought. Ethan leaned forward, his voice earnest. Claire, I meant what I said in there. I don't want to take anything from you or the company. If there's a way to legally refuse the inheritance, I'll do it. Claire's head snapped up, her eyes wide. You can't be serious, Ethan. This is your birthright. Our father wanted you to have it. A father I never knew, Ethan countered. My mom is all the family I've ever needed, and right now she's lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. That's what matters to me, not some corporate empire. Claire was quiet for a long moment, studying Ethan's face. When she spoke, her voice was soft but determined. You really are nothing like I expected. Maybe that's exactly what this company needs. Before Ethan could respond, there was a knock at the door. Westbrook entered, his expression grave. It's time, he said. The board is ready to make a decision. As they walked back to the boardroom, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, he knew he would face it with the same strength and integrity his mother had instilled in him. The board members watched in tense silence as Ethan and Claire took their seats. Westbrook cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Ethan. Mr. Miller, he began, after careful consideration, the board has come to a decision. We are prepared to offer you a position within Worthington Industries, with the understanding that you will undergo intensive training and education in business management. In return, we ask that you agree to place your shares in a trust to be managed by a committee of board members including yourself and Ms. Worthington." Ethan blinked, processing the offer. It was more than he had ever expected, a chance to honor his father's wishes while learning the ropes of a world entirely foreign to him. "There's one condition," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I want a portion of my inheritance to be used to set up a foundation in my mother's name, to help single parents and families struggling with medical bills." Westbrook raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I believe we can accommodate that request." As murmurs of agreement rippled around the table, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned to Claire, who gave him a small, genuine smile, the first he had ever seen from her. In that moment, Ethan realized that this was more than just a business decision. It was the first step towards healing the wounds of the past and building a new kind of family, one founded on honesty, compassion, and shared purpose. As the meeting adjourned and hands were shaken, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. His mother was awake and asking for him. With a nod to Claire, he hurried out of the boardroom, eager to share the news with the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a chance at a better life. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges he could scarcely imagine. But for the first time in his life, Ethan felt ready to face whatever came next, not just for himself, but for the family he never knew he had. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room as Ethan sat by his mother's bedside, holding her frail hand. Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she listened to her son recount the events of the board meeting. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've handled this all so well. But are you sure this is what you want? It's such a big change from everything you've known." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I'm sure, Mom. It's a chance to do some real good in the world. And maybe it's a chance to get to know the family I never had." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Claire stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said. "I just wanted to see how you were doing, Margaret." Margaret's eyes widened in surprise, but she managed a warm smile. "Claire, please come in. It's good to see you." As Claire entered the room, Ethan was struck by how different she looked from the cold, imperious woman he had first met. Her designer suit was slightly rumpled, her makeup less than perfect. For the first time, she looked human. "I brought these," Claire said, producing a bouquet of colorful wildflowers. "I remembered you mentioning once that you loved flowers that looked like they'd been freshly picked from a meadow." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered that? It was so long ago." Claire nodded, arranging the flowers in a vase by the bed. "I remember more than I let on, I suppose. Margaret, I owe you an apology. For everything." The room fell silent as the weight of years of secrets and pain hung in the air. Ethan watched as his mother and newfound sister regarded each other, decades of complex emotions passing between them. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Claire, you have nothing to apologize for. We all made choices for better or worse. What matters now is how we move forward." Claire sank into a chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, it's all been a lie." Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Not everything, Claire. The company you've helped build, the good it can do in the world, that's real. And now, well, you have a brother, if you want one." Claire looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze. A ghost of a smile played at her lips. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. As the three of them talked, sharing stories and beginning the long process of healing old wounds, Ethan felt a plan forming in his mind. It was risky, potentially controversial, but he knew in his heart it was the right thing to do. The next morning, Ethan called for another board meeting. As he stood before the assembled executives, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for their reaction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I've made a decision about my inheritance. I want to donate the majority of it to establish the Margaret Miller Foundation for Family Health and Education." A shocked murmur rippled through the room. Claire, sitting at Ethan's right hand, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Mr. Miller?" Charles Westbrook sputtered. "Surely you can't be serious. We're talking about billions of dollars." Ethan nodded. his resolve firm. "I am serious, Mr. Westbrook. My mother spent her entire life sacrificing for me, working multiple jobs to give me opportunities she never had. There are millions of families out there struggling just like we did. This foundation can make a real difference in their lives. But what about your stake in the company?" another board member asked. "I'll retain a small percentage of shares," Ethan explained. "Enough to have a voice in the company's direction, but not enough to control it. The rest will be divided between the foundation and Worthington Industries' existing charitable initiatives." Claire stood, addressing the board. "I think it's a brilliant idea," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It honors our father's wishes while creating a lasting legacy of positive change. I move that we support Ethan's decision and work with him to implement this plan." As the board erupted into heated discussion, Ethan caught Claire's eye. She gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice he was making and the new path they were forging together. Hours later, after countless negotiations and compromises, the plan was approved. As Ethan left the Worthington building, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had honored his mother's legacy of sacrifice and compassion while laying the groundwork for a future built on something more valuable than money: family, integrity, and the power to make a difference in the world. That evening, as Ethan sat by his mother's hospital bed, sharing the news of his decision, he saw a light in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. "Oh, my sweet boy," Margaret said, her voice choked with emotion. "You've become the man I always knew you could be. I'm so proud of you." Ethan squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening. "I learned from the best, Mom. Everything I am, everything I'll be able to do now, it's all because of you." As the sun set over the New York skyline, casting a warm glow through the hospital window, Ethan felt a sense of hope for the future. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with new responsibilities and unfamiliar territory, but he knew he wouldn't be walking it alone. With his mother's love, Claire's newfound support, and the power to effect real change in the world, Ethan was ready to embrace his unexpected legacy, not as a Worthington heir, but as Ethan Miller, a man determined to make a difference, one family at a time. 6 months had passed since the day Ethan's life had been turned upside down. The Margaret Miller Foundation was now a reality, its offices occupying an entire floor of the Worthington building. As Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the bustling city below, he marveled at how much had changed. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, turning to see Claire enter, a stack of papers in her arms. "Hey, little brother," she said with a smile that had become genuine over the past months. "Ready to go over the quarterly reports?" Ethan nodded, gesturing to the comfortable seating area. As they sat down, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The first few weeks after the board meeting had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, press conferences, and intense scrutiny from the media. Ethan's decision to donate the majority of his inheritance had been met with mixed reactions. Some hailed him as a philanthropic hero, while others questioned his competence and motives. Through it all, Claire had been an unexpected source of support. She had stood by him during the difficult press conferences, helped him navigate the complex world of corporate finance, and even defended him against some of the board's more vocal critics. Their relationship, once defined by hostility and misunderstanding, had slowly transformed into a genuine sibling bond. They had spent long nights talking, sharing stories of their childhoods, and gradually filling in the gaps of their shared history. As Claire began to go through the reports, Ethan's mind wandered to his mother. Margaret's health had improved significantly since that fateful night in the hospital. The stress of keeping her secret had taken a toll, but with the truth finally out in the open, she seemed to have found a new lease on life. She had insisted on being involved in the foundation, lending her years of experience as a single mother to help shape its programs. Seeing her eyes light up as she talked about the families they were helping brought joy to Ethan's heart. "Earth to Ethan," Claire's voice cut through his thoughts. "Did you hear what I said about the new education initiative?" Ethan blinked, focusing back on the present. "Sorry, I was just thinking about how far we've come." Claire's expression softened. "It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?" I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you came into my life, Ethan. You've changed everything, and mostly for the better. Ethan smiled, touched by her words. Thanks, Claire, I couldn't have done any of this without you. As they continued to go over the reports, Ethan felt a surge of pride. The foundation was making real progress, providing medical assistance to families in need, offering educational scholarships, and even launching a mentorship program for aspiring entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. Later that evening, Ethan made his way to a small Italian restaurant in the East Village. As he entered, he spotted his mother already seated at a corner table, looking healthier and happier than he had seen her in years. "Mom," he said, bending to kiss her cheek before taking his seat. "You look amazing." Margaret beamed at him. "I feel amazing, sweetheart. The new treatment is working wonders and the doctor is optimistic." As they shared a meal, talking and laughing, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Despite all the challenges and upheavals of the past months, he had gained so much: a sister, a purpose, and most importantly, more time with his mother. "I have some news," Margaret said as they were finishing their dessert. "I've decided to write a book." Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "A book? About what?" Margaret's eyes twinkled. "About us, about Richard, about the choices we make and the secrets we keep. I think it's time to tell our story, all of it." Ethan reached across the table, taking his mother's hand. "Are you sure? It might stir up a lot of old feelings." Margaret nodded, her expression serene. "I'm sure. I think it might help other people who are struggling with similar situations. And besides," she added with a wry smile, "I hear people like a good scandal." They both laughed, the sound of their shared mirth filling the cozy restaurant. As they left the restaurant, walking arm in arm down the bustling New York street, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The future was still uncertain, filled with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But he knew that whatever came, he would face it with the strength his mother had instilled in him, the support of his newfound sister, and the knowledge that he was using his unexpected legacy to make a real difference in the world. The Worthington name, once a symbol of cold corporate power, was being transformed into a force for good. And Ethan Miller, the boy from the Bronx who had once felt so out of place in the world of the elite, had found his true calling. As they reached Margaret's apartment building, Ethan hugged his mother tightly. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." Margaret cupped his face in her hands, her eyes shining with pride and love. "My sweet boy," she said softly, "you've become more than I ever dreamed possible. Remember, no matter what happens, no matter how big the foundation gets, or how much the world changes around us, the most important thing is the love we share. That's the true legacy." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his soul. As he watched his mother disappear into her building, he turned to face the city, its lights twinkling like stars in the gathering dusk. The story of the secret Worthington heir had captivated the world for a brief, intense moment. But the real story, Ethan knew, was just beginning. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the power of love to overcome even the deepest wounds. As he hailed a taxi to take him back to his apartment, Ethan smiled to himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. And he was ready to face them all, armed with the greatest inheritance his parents could have given him, not money or power, but love, compassion, and the courage to do what was right. The taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying Ethan towards his future. A future bright with possibility, rich with newfound family, and dedicated to turning an unexpected legacy into a force for good in the world.
So, if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button below and join our community. Based on your interests, we've picked this story for you that's showing on your screen right now. Click to watch it now. We're sure you'll love it. See you next time.